Back to the Keep Going podcast, Vin Kennedy. I'm your host, Vin Kennedy. Today we have a special guest. It's Aaron. Aaron, you want to do a brief intro on yourself?
Yeah, my name's Aaron Kubala. I'm an ultra runner and I'm based out of San Francisco, California.
Yeah, and how I heard about you is through TSP, and you actually won the solo expedition for TSP. So if you kind of want to, we could start right there, and you kind of talk about how you got into it and your journey.
Yeah, absolutely. So, yeah, with the speed project, I joined some friends from Austin, where I originally grew up. They reached out to me last year and said they were doing this race called the Speed Project. I hadn't heard of it, but they were actually looking for crew and a photographer, and I kind of hopped on as both, but ended up pacing about 60 miles, and that was like my introduction to the race. And the whole time we were doing this, we saw Lucy Schultz, who did the solo field, and she absolutely crushed it last year. In the back of my mind, I kept wondering, I was like, what would it feel like to do it solo? And so that was my introduction to TSP. But this year came out and decided to race 300 miles or 290 miles and see just how fast I could do it, and set a pretty aggressive goal time and was able to hit that. Uh, so yeah, that's the story.
Yeah, that's awesome. And what was your finishing time?
75 hours on the dot.
Yeah, it's incredible. And like you said, it was 290 miles, correct?
Yeah, it's 291 plus or minus probably a few, whatever Garmin or Coro says.
Cool. And then for you personally, like what was your run journey and kind of how did you build into doing something like that?
Yeah, I mean there are a couple ways to approach this question, but it's kind of been since I got into ultra running back in 2018. It's been like a slow build over the years and almost a classic progression of 50K, 50 miles, 100K, 100 miles. And then I did Moab 240 back in October, and that was kind of the jump for TSP. But between 100 and that, like 100 to 200 is a big jump. So my thought was I would do a bunch of mountainous races. So I did a race called Ouray 100, which is out in Ouray, Colorado, and that has, I think, 40,000 something feet of gain. And the cutoff time is like 52 hours. So it feels a bit more like a 200 than a 100. And they're just building up. And then, yeah, let's see, 5 months after Moab, decided to take this on.
That's insane. And how was Moab? How was your experience there?
It was amazing. Moab's a stunning race. You're out in the desert. It was very different than TSP in that, a lot of the aid stations are 20 plus miles apart. And TSP, I had a crew and I was supported the entire time. So we were joking around like the speed project was like the most cushy race you can ask for as an ultra runner. You got aid stops whenever you have access to like a microwave, an oven. Uh, I was ripping smoothies the whole time, which like in Moab, I don't have access to a blender. So it felt like, it was a different style of racing, but equally fulfilling, I would say.
Yeah, that's awesome. And what were some like the key takeaways that you had from TSP?
Oh, there's so many, man. It's like I'm not definitely still processing the experience as well. It's been 3 weeks since I finished, and I'm feeling pretty good physically, but like it's such a deep experience to spend 75 hours sleep deprived. Like it's something you return to for months. But I learned a lot about, the importance of like a lot of logistic things. So being on top of my electrolytes, food, nutrition, I mean, that's all pretty standard stuff. But little things like shoe changes, sock changes every 50 miles, pacing. I think even just sort of the challenge with TSP is like there's a lot of road running and there's a lot of boring running. Like the stretch from Victorville, there's nothing there. And it's like a lot of that is mental management and mood management. Because in Moab, you're in like beautiful desert and nature and there's shooting stars and there was like a solar eclipse when I did it. In TSP, you're in like, frankly, some of the ugliest parts of the country. And that almost makes it like you got to tap into what you love about running. You got to find ways with your crew to make it interesting. I know a lot of other runners have like done themed days or themed parties, and it's like that's part of the fun is how do you keep something that's in like a very boring, almost decrepit part of the country, like keep that exciting.
Sure, it could get really monotonous out there, but yeah, I mean that's the experience of Moab sounds incredible.
Uh-huh. Yeah, I mean,
And then
I
so
sorry, go ahead.
no, 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 you go.
I was just saying it's something I would recommend to anyone that has interest in it for sure.
And then personally for like where you're at, like, I don't know the last time you raced a marathon, if ever. I'd be curious to hear like what was your pacing like on the road for the stretches during TSP? Because that's obviously you're running 290 miles. It's not like you could. marathon pace, obviously.
No, definitely not. And that was one of the challenges for me is especially, the first 50 miles, it's all flat and it's all road. It's incredibly runnable. And after, your taper and you're training for this, like you never have more energy. And so the challenge is actively holding yourself back. And so my team and I, like we told ourselves, like I'm allowed two sub 10 miles, but after that, like I got to keep it everything above 10. And so, it's the balance as well is if you go too slow, you can change your running form. So if you're not used to running that way, like that can cause a lot of problems down the line. So it's like whatever feels comfortable to run is probably pretty good as long as it's above a 10-minute mile. And I think over the course of this race, my fastest mile pace was like 9:37, which it's not a fast race. It's you're just
Right.
doing this slow grind. But that's part of like the longevity in the sport and in the race is you got to preserve your body. And so, you can talk about like economy of motion or economy of energy. And it's like you're doing everything you can to move forward as efficiently as possible, which is an interesting game. It's very different than like a speedy road marathon.
Yeah, that's so interesting. So I'd be curious to hear, where do you train like your easy runs at?
Yeah, so I mean, it's also difficult to train, especially for me. Like I'm not used to training at a slow pace, but for speed project specifically is, my background's more as a trail runner, and so I do predominantly trails, but knowing TSP was, I think my route probably two-thirds road. I started doing a lot more road running, um, and yeah, really trying to cruise like that 10-minute pace, uh, which sometimes sucks. It takes more time. Like,
Yeah,
you want to be running faster miles, but there's a discipline there that took a while for me to learn.
yeah. No, I definitely know what you mean. And I've been getting into the longer stuff, but I just sub 3'd in January. And like they're just something about like also turning your legs over that it's just it gets done quicker and sometimes it's more enjoyable.
Congrats. Yeah, that's awesome. And also like, yeah, I mean, that's a huge accomplishment for anyone. But as you know, like it feels good to go fast and it feels good to fly. And I think it can feel good to do the opposite, but you got to get used to it. You got to train yourself to do that. And yeah, it feels like a different world sometimes.
Yeah, and I think that's like one of the coolest parts about running is that there's like it's like different sports within the same sport.
100%. I mean, even like 100 versus 200, those feel like separate sports. And then, 200 versus whatever you want to call TSP, like just hyper distance. I don't know.
It's true. And what would you say personally you learned was the biggest difference between 100 to 200?
The the management of nutrition and foot care and electrolytes, that all matters way more in a 200. It's like the name of the game is can you keep getting calories? Can you keep drinking water? And a lot of people fall off. Oh, nice. Got the BPN
The
water
TSP
bottle.
one.
Oh, the TSP. Yeah, yeah.
That's so funny.
But yeah, I mean, I think the logistic challenges become more important the longer you push the distance. And it almost feels like less of a physical, it is a physical endeavor, but it feels like the physicality is less important than the logistics and the decision making. And then obviously the mental game is there as well, but I think that's true across all of running.
Yeah. It really is just a game of like, can you last?
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
and then just two things. One thing that I noticed is that TSP seems more like an adventure than a race because it's also like navigating. And I'm
Yeah. Yeah.
curious, were you guys like pre-planned navigation? Or and was that something that was kind of like fully taken off of you? Was that like all crew of like any turns or any navigation issues really?
No, well, so yeah, there are definitely issues. I think that's part of the fun of TSP is
Yeah.
like you can plan as much as you want, but some things like shit's gonna hit the fan at some point. And I planned the route pretty far in advance, kind of based on the route my relay team did last year, but I combed the whole thing on Google Maps like pretty scrupulously. And then one of the other solo runners, James Poole, who's done it many times, we got connected and I mean, this guy's amazing, but he like combed my route, gave suggestions. Like one of the things he said to do was pretty critical for like just making a great race. Um, but to that point, like there's going to be stuff that just happens. And I got lost a few times. At one point, I almost down climbed a cliff, which could have been like disastrous. I didn't even know there are cliffs in this route. We got our car stuck at 3 in the morning in the middle of the desert and like had to call a tow. And so it's in that sense, it is like it's an adventure because just shit's gonna go wrong. But part of the fun is like adapting, and then part of the challenge is not letting those setbacks like get you down. Because I mean they will, but like you got to keep going, right?
Yeah. No, absolutely. And I'd be curious to hear like what's like your one standout moment from the TXP TSP experience?
What do you mean by standout moment?
So personally, and I'll just kind of use mine, and I've been talking about this. I can't stop talking about it really. I did the relay, and there was a stretch of, I think it was like 7.5 miles, where we just couldn't get the truck through, and we had an RV in a truck, and we would kind of like pace along with the truck, and then the RV would be parked like 36 miles up, and we would keep switching until we got to the RV. Um, at one point, we could not take the truck at all, and luckily, like I got to run that portion. It was longer than we were splitting up the mileage, and I got to watch the sunrise over the mountains, and it was like the coolest experience. And it's literally it made me. I'm trying to find the application to get the application to do solo next year for this. That was like it's such a transformative moment.
Yeah, absolutely. And especially, I mean, those sunrises are so special because you've been pushing through the night. And usually for most people, like the deep nights when you get up some big lows and the sunrise, like it resets the circadian rhythm. And then it's also just like, it's fucking beautiful, you
Yeah,
know, and oftentimes you're in the middle of
absolutely.
nowhere. It feels so earned too. It's like you earn
Yeah,
that sunrise. And so, yeah, I totally sympathize with that. Like that's the transcendent moment. Um,
absolutely.
yeah, so I guess I would say two things. Like one is very crew based, and that is when we did get the car stuck. So, you know, I think this is maybe like 180 miles in, and the car is like we're in this riverbed. I actually, quite frankly, don't even know where it's all blurry. I don't quite know where we were. I think outside of Baker. Um, and I see like the car is kind of struggling in the back, and it's two of my crew there, and they're like, "Oh, go ahead, like we'll catch you." And I keep going, I keep turning around, I don't see lights, and so I'm just like, "Huh, that's odd." You know, I get to our planned RV stop, and the rest of the crew comes out, and they're like, "So we have an issue. Don't freak out, but we no longer have a car." And the adaptation was basically I took my sleep earlier and I just popped in for an hour and a half nap. And when I woke up, that situation was fully resolved. And at that point, it was like this unshakable faith that my crew could do anything. And so for me, that was like I was inspired by how my crew was able to perform and fix the problem. And you know, we just kept going. It wasn't really a setback. So that was a pretty special moment. Um, but I would say I didn't really have any massive lows throughout the race until night three. And you know, I was pushing the sleep deprivation quite a bit. I'd slept an hour and a half the first night, an hour and a half the second night. Um, and the plan was to push through the third night. And when we took Powerline Road and we came down to Prim, in my mind, I almost treated that like the race was over, you know, because from Prim to Vegas, it's what a 30 mile stretch. It's net downhill, it's on road. And so, especially from the relay last year, like our team was flying. Like my team last year was hitting mile PRs on that section. And so in my mind, I was like, this is going to be a breeze. But I kind of forgot it was like 250 miles into the race. I hadn't slept. And then like, you know, I think the atmosphere of the team was like, oh, we're done, we're celebrating, we finished this. But I still got 8 hours ahead of me, and I just hit this absolute wall. And I had to. I told my pacer with me, the guy named Jamie, is an amazing pacer. Uh, I was like, at first time I started hallucinating, and I was like, I'm hallucinating pretty badly. Like I don't quite know what to do. Like we'll keep pushing, but like I can't see, and it's like this lonely desert stretch, and all the lights are shaking, and I had to take a 10-minute nap in the car and reset. But I don't think I've ever had to push that much in anything where I basically did 2 hours of like breathing exercises. And my pacer, Jamie, was like walking me through this, but it's like we're counting, we're breathing, we're just moving slowly. And I kind of just like gave up control and had him and my team pace me with this strategy that was it was honk to run and it was double honk to walk. And for about 4 hours in the night, I mean, I probably have PTSD from this, but it was like I'd hear the honk, I'd start running, and they were just pacing me perfectly with the walk run to get me to that 75-hour goal time. Um, but you know, having that as like one of the biggest lows I've had, and then coming through that and like transcending that experience was amazing because up to that point it was all kind of smooth sailing. Uh, but yeah, now I hear a car horn and it's like, oh, do I have to run again?
Yeah, that's wild. That's crazy. And I'd be curious, like when it comes to basically your experience there and training for this kind of stuff, like what's the big difference between a 100 miler, a 200 miler, and then something like TSP? Like how does your training vary?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, there are definitely different schools of thought on this, and I think something that's really special about like the 200 plus world is that we don't really know like the optimized meta necessarily, and so people are still discovering new ways to approach this. But I probably do lower mileage than one would think for a 300-mile race. Like I think my peak week for TSP was probably 90, 95. Um, but I do a lot of like supplementary workouts, supplementary weightlifting. And my idea behind that is TSP is so road forward. You got to get your body used to the pounding. And so instead of just going out and busting out big miles, and I mean that can maybe be damaging to the body if it's not done right. You're reducing the mileage and focusing on like strengthening stability, your like Bulgarian split squats, Romanian deadlifts, like all of that stuff, I think has like it pays dividends down the line. And so that's a unique approach to training. I mean, there's definitely a mental approach to training as well, which I think is you have to like cultivate what you love in the run. Otherwise, you're not going to succeed. Like you have to find, your joy in the sport. And when those tough moments hit, like return to that. Um, yeah, and then I think dialing in nutrition and figuring out what works for you. I typically do like a lower carb approach, which is kind of a different school of thought, and it's like almost you do this keto resets, and you're trying to get fat as a more efficient fuel. And in my mind, so carbs are your body's like most efficient source of fuel. So I am ripping carbs throughout the race, but having trained my stomach to sort of use fat as a fuel, it's almost like when the glycogen stores run out, you could switch over and so I think a lot of people in the 200-mile world have had success doing that. There's also people that have success doing, tons of carbs. And
Right.
so the world's still different. But for me, I think that has helped me dial in nutrition is uh is having that sort of lower carb approach before, but who knows?
Yeah. It's all personal preference, and really, like you said, it's just like what works. And I'd be curious to hear what was your biggest mile week leading into Moab.
This is interesting as well. My biggest mile week leading to Moab, I think, was 75, which is hilarious because like a lot of people who do marathons do bigger mile, like higher mileage weeks than that. Um, and so yeah, I mean, part of the name of the game is just consistency. And I think, if you're doing this over years, it's different than just building up quickly to 100 miles and then racing. But I truly believe that like the cross training and the supplementary workouts are just huge for reducing strain in your body, but also building strength in those like it's those little muscles like hips and glutes that, in an ultra, like that's what hurts first often. And if you can strengthen those, I think it's like you're going to see amazing returns down the line.
Yeah, it's so true. And it's interesting too because like you're in it for the longevity then, right? Like I mean, you didn't go over a 95-mile week for a 280-mile or 290-mile race. Like
Mhm.
that's great. Like your body didn't take like so much beating up to get there.
100%. I think the name of the game for success in hyper distance is the longevity piece. Like the guy that won Moab this year, Jesse Haynes, he's 51. And it's like you can do this so late in life, and it's just you have decades of mileage and experience built up. And so it's, one of the main goals is injury prevention. And I think that strength training helps as well. But it's just, it's everyone gets injured at some point, but if you can reduce that, it's net good.
It's true. Yeah, and then we can keep doing what we love. And I'd be curious to hear your experience from like being on the relay team and then having the crew. Like, how did it change for you personally? Because obviously, like the relay crew, you guys are in it together. When people are crewing for you, you're in it together, but in a different kind of like domain.
Yeah, I mean, both are, especially like with the ethos and speed projects, no spectators, like both are very heavily involved. And I think I tried to set expectations for my crew about how demanding it is. I don't think anyone ever realizes until they're in it. And they just rose to the challenge. And a lot of my crew only got a few hours of sleep over that period as well. They're out there with me. And especially for this race, like one thing that was huge for me is muling is allowed, right? And there's no rules. So it's like in Moab, I'm carrying a maybe 10-pound pack for most of that race. And in this, it was nothing, which is again, it's so spoiled. And so it's actually like one of my pacers, Charles. We perfected this method where it's like he has the bladder and we're moving and I'm just sipping from his bladder while I'm moving. And it's like it just felt so silly.
Yeah,
Uh, but yeah, the difference between the relay is just the speed, and in the relay, there's I feel like there's less room for error. It has to be more precise because it's just a race that's probably twice as fast. Whereas in something, and this is something I like about the 200-mile world, is like it's more about adaptation and problem solving than precision. And it's important to try to be precise in your planning and your nutrition and all of that, but it's not you can't do that over 300 miles. And so when the problems happen, when your car breaks down or when we get off course and I'm like about to down climb a cliff, like you have to make those decisions that actually like affect the race. Whereas in the relay, something like that could like make or break the race. But in this distance, it's, there's time to adapt, time to overcome. There are quieter moments, I think, where relay is like always on all the time.
Right. Yeah. Oh, it's interesting. And I just gotta let you know that I'm gonna use that for when I do it personally. Just that you keep saying it's like this cushiony thing. Like I'm just gonna keep saying that in my head for the times when it's not doesn't feel cushiony.
Yeah,
But yeah,
exactly.
those are definitely the games I'm sure you're aware that we play with ourselves.
Yeah.
And then I'd be curious to hear like who are you outside of running? Because obviously I know it's a big part of your life. It's a big part of my life. And I will just preface this by saying that I've asked people this, I've asked myself this, and like it could be a tough question.
I think it is a tough question. I think a lot of people that get into ultra running, like it demands so much of you and your time and your lifestyle that it does become, I think, inherently part of your identity. But obviously, all of us have parts like outside of that. Um, Yeah, so by trade right now, my day job is like a data scientist. My background is in economic development research, and so I spent a good part of my early 20s kind of like traveling around the world, living in Kenya, living in Bangladesh, living in Thailand, like for these research projects. So I think something that's been appealing to me for ultra running, it's like it's that sense of adventure. And even as you said, like TSP is more an adventure than a race. And that's something I think I've always felt like a need to do. And so ultra running sort of filled that desire for, that push for more, that want to be in these crazy parts of the world. Um, so yeah, I guess even outside of the running aspect, like there's that adventure aspect that I would identify with. But also, I mean, I'm 29. I'm in my late 20s. I live in San Francisco with two of my college best friends, and it's like there's this very social aspect of just, enjoying your life at this moment. Like I want a family and kids down the line. I don't have that now, but I think at this age in my life, there is this sense of like adventure and camaraderie amongst all of our friends, and it's like let's go out and experience life in as much as we can. And to me, I'm sure you feel similarly with like the Speed Project. Like it feels like such a hyper present sport where you do feel like you're optimizing like your limited time in life. Like you're so present and so focused, and little details can have such like meaning. I think something that was so important to me was throughout the race, just that sound of like the foot on the dirt. It became over time this like beautiful thing, and it's like meditative. And those little details in races like this, I think, come out in a way that you don't expect in day-to-day life.
Yeah. No, it's so true. And you hit it. I'm 29 as well. And like the last 2 years have just been like traveling and racing and like friends races and crewing and racing myself and pacing. And it's like you have no choice but to be where your feet are when you're in those events, especially when you're in them specifically, because like you're in your body, like you're in your body and like you're just there. There's no way around the pain and just the mental games you have to play with yourself. And that forces you to be in those moments.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, I think you hit the nail on the head here as well with like in my low day three from Prim to Vegas. What the most significant thought I feel like I kept having was like at that point, I'm hallucinating, I'm probably undernutritioned, I'm burning out, my body was getting cold, my heart rate was escalating. And in some sense, like that might feel abjectly miserable. But at that point, I'm so in it, I have no choice but to continue. I'm like, I know I'm gonna get my goal. And so the challenge is like, how in that pocket can I learn to enjoy that moment? Like, what little things can I focus on that are going to allow me to enjoy that? And that feels like a transcendent experience, right? To be confronted with all this like noise and this pain and output some sense of like fulfillment or joy. That's a pretty crazy, profound thing to do. And something like Speed Project or these races, like, it almost forces you to do that.
Yeah. No, it's so true. And it's something I kept telling myself is I live in New Jersey and I was like, I'm in the desert running. Like it was a little rainy at one point. I was dealing with Achilles tendonitis and I was like, yeah, I could bitch and complain, or I could just be like, I am here right now. And before I know it, I'm gonna be back in New Jersey. And it's like, just be here.
Exactly. And that choice to me is what's so significant. It's like you can choose to feel this or that, but like to choose, like, I'm going to be here and I'm going to do this. Like, that's a significant choice.
No, absolutely. And I'd be curious, like, what's it and how long have you been running for?
So my background is a soccer player. I played soccer my whole life. I played club in college, and I did 2018 was my first. I did the Boston Marathon, but I did it with a charity. I was like young and cocky and like I didn't really train. So I did like adequately, but it was nothing like crazy impressive. Um, and then the year after that is when I got into ultra running. And so it's that 2018, 2019. Yeah, it's basically a 5 year journey.
Yeah,
Um, which
that's
for
awesome.
some is short, for some is long, but I mean, you can see pretty crazy improvement in 5 years.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'd just be curious, like, what's advice you would give to a younger version of yourself?
Yeah, I mean, that's an interesting question. I think like you have to find the joy in what you're doing, and that can come from a lot of different angles. Like if you're just, I think some people can get overly fixated on the goal, right, and not the process. And especially in something that's like road marathon or speed road marathon, it's like I gotta hit that 3:30, I gotta hit that three, gotta hit that sub 2:45. And if you're not enjoying what you're doing leading up to that, it's like why are you having that goal? You know what I mean? And so the advice to my younger self is like tap into the community, tap into what you like. And only in the past, I would say 2 years have I found like a run community. Most of my stuff before was all solo. I think it's valuable to have that experience. But now, I mean, the Bay Area has such a hotbed for ultra running that to get up and run at 5 in the morning is the easiest thing because I'm just going to see 15 of my friends. And it just feels like it's that reframing of instead of training, it's like it's social time. Or instead of like, oh, it's this sacrifice I'm making, it's like, oh, it's this thing I'm enjoying. I think to my younger self, I would tell that person, like, make that transition to enjoy it more.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I just it's insane what community really could do because I don't know if I would continue doing the stuff that I'm doing, and I'm curious to hear if you would continue doing what you're doing if you didn't find community.
I think it would be hard to. I mean, I think there is absolutely enjoyment and fulfillment in like a long solo run, but I think if you're evaluating it over the course of like a lifetime, I mean, what's your angle? Like, what's your purpose? I mean, I think yeah, absolutely, you can connect to yourself on a solo run, but to your point, like, I think one of the deep joys of this sport is how fully ingrained the community is with each other. And it's some of the most unfailingly supportive people you'll meet, right? So, I mean, as an example, one of my pacers, Jamie, in Speed Project, I did not know him before this race. I reached out to one of my run groups on WhatsApp, and he was like, "Hey, I'm Jamie. Like, we have mutual friends. It's my background." And he was just giving his absolute all out there. And it's like, that's such a kind of like sacrifice that I think is pretty hard to find outside. I mean, it's there, but outside of this run community. And so it's like running's a vessel for that kind of supportive other, right?
Yeah, that's so true. And even it kind of goes back to our other when we were talking about like who are you outside of running? It's like you could almost you don't have to be outside of running. Like it could be a part of you because part of it is also the community.
Yeah.
Like it's the social aspect. It's such an interesting dynamic where like I played baseball and sports growing up and it was just it's so different than the stuff I have going on now with running.
Yeah, 100%. I think I don't know if this is like so from Lucy Schultz, the record holder from last year, she has a take that's like running as a team sport. I don't know if that's from elsewhere from her, but I think it's from the outside, a lot of people don't understand how much running is a team sport, even a solo run, right? It's that community piece that makes it meaningful.
Yeah, absolutely. And the last question that I ask everybody is what keeps you going?
Oh man, that's a great question. I think the short answer is it changes over your life. Like I think you can have these goals, and maybe it's like it's the goal setting that keeps you going, or this desire to like this pursuit of like greatness, or maybe it's this pursuit of meditation. But I think that what keeps you have to continually find new ways to stay inspired and motivated over the course of your life. And I think that's one of the beautiful things is that your motivations change, but you keep running. And the sport has so much to give that like your motivations can drastically change over years, but you're still seeking that push. So right now, what's keeping me going is I want to push this distance and I think maybe establish this distance a bit more. I want to help build the sport. I think the joy that I've gotten from 200s and 300s, like I would like that to be more broadly available. And so even just one angle is like dispelling this idea that 200s are this terribly crazy thing. Like I think they're achievable and there's a process and there's a logic to it that for many people, unless you see that in person, unless you know someone, you've paced someone, you've gone out to crew, it's hard to envision something as intense as 200 miles. But for me, I've had a few mentors that like I've come out and paced in races, and it's seeing that allows you to believe that that distance is possible. And I think I would like to maybe like advocate for this distance being a more achievable thing for most people.
Yeah. No, absolutely. And you nail that because I've read, I'm sure like most people, I read David Goggins, didn't even know
Mhm.
about 100-mile races before that. And then I was only running marathons, screwed and paced a buddy that ran 100, watched him do it. And then I don't even know, maybe 5 months later did it myself. But same thing, like I wrote down to run 100 miles in 2020, but it was one of those things. It was like, David Goggins did it. Like it's something cool to write down. I never thought. I really like. I would read it every morning too, like an affirmation, and I was like, "There's no way." And then I watched my buddy do it, and it's like it was all real. Like it's all doable.
Yeah, and that's, I mean, that's an empowering thing, is to have this goal that you set that feels so distant and impossible. And then like bit by bit you chip away, and next thing you know, you're doing it. And like for you, next thing you know, you're taking on maybe Speed Project Solo next year. Not just
Yeah,
100 miles, but maybe 300.
yeah, no, absolutely. I gotta ask, do you have the 300-mile race that I believe it's in Arizona, right? Is that on your radar?
Yeah, the Destination Trails one. Yeah, that's on the radar for sure. I'm thinking like what I want to do next year is Triple Crown. So it's all the destination trails, but Bigfoot, Tahoe, Moab, and they're not too far apart. And so, that's for me, doing this race in 2 weeks is kind of like testing out what it feels like to do. Maybe not fully recovered, but yeah, keep pushing this 200-mile distance, and maybe I'll look into some longer FKTs trails and see what it's like to go farther. Um, but yeah, for now, just keep pushing.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I really appreciate your time, man. Thank you.
Yeah, likewise.
Nice meeting you both. Thank you.
You as well.